Sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us exactly where we need to be. Ben Carter had lost his job, his marriage, and nearly his hope when he found himself standing before a crumbling mountain cabin he'd bought for just $1. His 10-year-old son Noah pressed his face against the dusty windows, the first real smile Ben had seen from the boy in months. The locals called it the Dollar Cabin, a worthless relic from the 1930s that nobody wanted. But when Noah discovered an old blueprint hidden behind the fireplace, everything changed. The faded paper was signed by a forgotten architect and seemed to point towards something incredible. The cabin wasn't just a broken-down shelter, it was hiding a secret worth $50 million. The question was simple. How do you find a fortune that's been lost for nearly a century? But could a run-down cabin really hold the key to millions? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 months earlier, Ben Carter had been a different man entirely. He'd worn pressed shirts to his job as a project manager at Denver Construction, drove a sedan that started every morning without complaint, and lived in a 2-story house with a mortgage that felt manageable. Most importantly, he'd been married to Sarah, and Noah had lived with them full-time, his laughter echoing through halls that smelled like Sarah's vanilla candles and weekend pancakes. But life has a way of unraveling faster than you can tie it. Back together. The first thread came loose when Hartwell Construction landed the contract Ben had been promised for 8 months. His supervisor, Jim Reeves, called it restructuring. Ben called it what it was, being pushed out by a younger guy with an MBA and no calluses on his hands. 23 years with the company, and they gave him 2 weeks severance and a handshake that felt like a slap. Sarah held it together for exactly 6 weeks. She'd supported him through the job search, made his coffee stronger, and rubbed his shoulders when he came home defeated after another interview that went nowhere. But when the bills started piling up and Ben couldn't hide his panic anymore, when he snapped at Noah for leaving his bike in the driveway and later found Sarah crying in the laundry room, they both knew the marriage was fracturing under pressure. Neither of them had asked for . The divorce papers came on a Tuesday. Sarah's lawyer had drafted them with surgical precision: joint custody, weekends only for Ben, and the house would be sold to split the assets. Ben signed them, sitting in his pickup truck outside a gas station, using the glove compartment as a desk, while Noah waited inside, buying a candy bar with quarters they'd scraped from the cup holder. That truck became their world. A 2018 Ford F-150 with rust spots behind the wheel wells and a rattling tailgate that Noah had learned to ignore. Ben sold everything else. The tools he'd collected over 2 decades, Sarah's grandmother's dining set, even his father's fishing gear, just to keep gas in the tank and food in Noah's stomach. The boy handled it better than any 10-year-old should have to. Noah never complained about sleeping in the truck's extended cab on the nights Ben couldn't afford even a cheap motel. He never asked why they ate peanut butter sandwiches for dinner 3 nights running, or why his dad's eyes looked so hollow in the rearview mirror. Instead, Noah filled a small sketchbook with drawings, their truck parked under different stars, mountains he wanted to climb, cabins where they might live someday when things got better. "Look, Dad," Noah had said one evening, showing Ben a pencil drawing of a stone house with smoke curling from its chimney. "It's got a big fireplace and windows everywhere, and see this." He pointed to tiny figures by the front door. "That's us, but we're smiling." Ben had studied that drawing longer than he should have, memorizing every line Noah had carefully shaded. His son still believed things could get better. That hope felt both precious and fragile, like something Ben needed to protect, but wasn't. Sure, he could. The classified advertisement appeared in the Tuesday edition of the Mountain Echo, a weekly paper Ben had picked up at a diner in Leadville while Noah used the restroom. He almost missed it, a tiny box tucked between ads for used farm equipment and a lost dog. Mountain cabin, Cedar Ridge area, stone construction, original 1930s build, mature buyer only, $1, cash, as is, no inspections, final sale, serious inquiries. 719-555-0847. Ben read it 3 times, certain he'd missed a zero or misunderstood something fundamental. $1. Not 1,000 or 10,000. $1 single for a cabin in the mountains. He called from the diner's payphone while Noah colored on paper placemats. Whitmore property, a gravelly voice answered after 6 rings. I'm calling about the cabin ad in the Mountain Echo. Silence stretched so long, Ben thought the line had gone dead. You got cash? The voice finally asked. I've got $1. Can you be in Cedar Ridge tomorrow by noon? Yes, sir. Ask anyone for directions to Martha Henderson. She'll have the paperwork. The line went dead. Ben stood holding the receiver, wondering if he'd just agreed to the smartest or stupidest thing he'd ever done. When he turned around, Noah was watching, him with eyes that held too much understanding for a child. Was that about a house, Dad? Maybe, buddy, maybe. Cedar Ridge turned out to be less a town than a collection of buildings scattered along Highway 285 like dropped coins. The gas station doubled as a post office. The diner served breakfast all day, and every person they met seemed to know exactly why they were there before Ben said a word. You're the fool who bought the dollar cabin, said the station attendant. When Ben asked for directions, that's us, Ben replied, surprising himself with how steady his voice sounded. The man shook his head and pointed up a winding dirt road that disappeared into pine forests. Martha Henderson's place is the blue house, with the crooked fence, but if I were you, I'd get back in that truck and drive away. That cabin's got nothing but trouble waiting in its walls. Noah perked up from the passenger seat. What kind of trouble? The kind that's been sitting there for near 90 years, boy. Some things are better left alone. As they drove up the mountain road, Ben caught Noah sketching again, this time drawing what looked like a stone cabin surrounded by tall trees. The boy's imagination was already building their new home, and Ben felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. What if this was all a mistake? What if he'd just spent their last dollar on a cruel joke? Martha Henderson's blue house sat in a clearing surrounded by aspen trees that whispered secrets to each other in the afternoon breeze. The woman who answered. Their knock looked to be in her 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun, and eyes that seemed to see more than they revealed. You must be the Carters, she said before Ben could introduce himself. I've got your papers ready. She led them to a kitchen table covered with documents that looked older than Ben felt. The deed was handwritten on paper so thick it felt like cloth. The legal description mentioned boundary stones and creek beds, property lines marked by landmarks that might not exist anymore. Why $1? Ben asked, as he signed his name next to spaces marked with red X, S. Martha, S. expression softened. Because that's what Samuel Whitmore would have wanted. He never cared much for money, just for doing what was right. Who was Samuel Whitmore? The man who built your cabin. And the reason most folks around here think you're either very brave or very foolish. She handed Noah a sugar cookie from a tin decorated with faded flowers. What do you think, young man? Noah considered this seriously while chewing his cookie. I think we're brave. Dad says being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing, even when you are scared. Martha smiled, the first genuine warmth Ben had seen from anyone in Cedar Ridge. Your boy's got wisdom in him. He'll need it up there. She gave them a hand-drawn map marking the turnoff to the cabin and a rusty key that looked older than the state of Colorado. As they prepared to leave, she caught Ben's arm. The cabin's been empty a long time, but it's not forgotten. Samuel Whitmore was a good man who tried to help folks when they needed it most. If you're planning to make a life there, you honor that. You hear me? Ben nodded. Though he didn't fully understand what he was agreeing to. The dirt road to the cabin wound through forest so thick the afternoon sun came through in scattered coins of light. Noah pressed his face to the window, pointing out deer tracks and a hawk circling overhead. For the first time in months, Ben felt something that might have been optimism stirring in his chest. They smelled the cabin before they saw it. Pine sap and old wood, decades of mountain air seasoned with time and silence. Then the trees opened. Up and there it was. The photographs in Martha's papers hadn't done it justice. The cabin stood in a natural clearing beside a creek that talked to itself in gentle murmurs. Stone walls rose from a foundation that looked like it had grown from the mountain itself, and a steep roof suggested spaces above the main floor. Windows, though dusty and spiderwebbed, were larger than Ben had expected, positioned to capture morning light and evening shadows. It was beautiful. It was also clearly abandoned. Moss covered the north-facing stones, and several shutters hung at tired angles. The front porch sagged in the middle, and something had built a nest in what remained of the chimney. But the bones were solid, the stonework honest and strong. This was a place built to last. "It looks like a fairy tale house," Noah whispered, climbing out of the truck with his sketchbook clutched against his chest. Ben walked the perimeter first, checking the foundation while Noah explored the creek. The stonework was masterful. Each rock fitted so perfectly that after 90 years the walls remained straight and true. The roof needed work, and the windows would need replacing, but the structure itself felt sound. The front door opened with the rusty key Martha had given them, revealing a single large room with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. Dust motes danced in afternoon light streaming through dirty windows, and their footsteps echoed on wide plank. Floors that had aged to the color of honey. "Dad, look at this," Noah called from the fireplace. He was running his hands over the stones, tracing patterns in the mortar. "It's like a castle." Ben joined him, noting the careful craftsmanship in every detail. The firebox was deep enough to burn logs the size of telephone poles, and the mantel had been carved from a single piece of timber that must have been old when the cabin was young. They spent an hour exploring, finding a kitchen area with a window, over a dry sink, a steep staircase leading to a loft space under the eaves, and a back door that opened onto a view of peaks that stretched to the horizon. It wasn't just a cabin. It was a sanctuary, a place carved out of wilderness by someone who understood that home meant more than shelter. As evening approached, they unloaded their few possessions from the truck. Ben had packed everything they owned into 2 duffel bags and a cardboard box. Noah's stuff fit in a grocery bag, clothes, his sketchbook, 3 books, and a stuffed elephant he'd never admit to, still needing They built their first fire as darkness settled over the mountains. Ben had worried the chimney might be blocked, but smoke drew cleanly, and soon the cabin filled with warmth that felt like a promise. They ate sandwiches and shared a can of peaches, while flames painted dancing shadows on stone walls. "Dad?" Noah said as he settled into his sleeping bag near the fire. "Yeah, buddy. I like it here. It feels like home." Ben looked around the cabin, at their meager possessions scattered on the floor, at the windows that needed glazing, at the boy who'd grown up too fast over the past few months, and realized Noah was right. Despite everything that needed fixing, despite their uncertain future, despite having exactly $17.32 to their names, this place felt like home. "I like it here too, Noah. I like it here too." Their first night in the cabin passed quietly, punctuated only by the creek's gentle conversation and the settling sounds of old timber adjusting to new inhabitants. Ben woke before dawn, his internal clock still tuned to construction site schedules, and watched through dusty windows as morning light painted the mountains in shades of rose and gold. Noah slept curled in his sleeping bag near the dying embers of their fire, one arm wrapped around his stuffed elephant, his face peaceful in a way Ben hadn't seen for months. The boy had drawn pictures until his eyes grew heavy, sketching the cabin's interior with careful attention to details, the stone fireplace, the wooden beams overhead, the windows that framed the mountain view like natural paintings. Ben added, wood to the coals, and set water to heat on the camp stove they'd brought. Coffee would help him think through their immediate needs, fixing the sagging porch, replacing broken window panes, cleaning years of accumulated dust and debris. The work felt manageable, even welcoming. He'd spent his adult life building things, and now he had something of his own to restore. "Morning, Dad?" Noah's sleepy voice came from the floor near the fireplace. "Morning, buddy. Sleep okay?" "Better than in the truck." Noah sat up, rubbing his eyes. "Can we explore more today? I want to see what's upstairs." The loft space proved to be larger than it appeared from below, with enough headroom for Ben to stand upright, and windows on 3 sides that would flood the space with light once they were clean. Noah immediately claimed it as his bedroom, spinning in the center of the empty room with his arms outstretched. "Look, Dad, I can see the whole world from up here." It wasn't quite the whole world, but the view was spectacular. Mountains rolled away in every direction, their peaks catching morning light like beacons. A hawk circled lazily above the forest, and in the distance, Ben could make out the thin line of the highway that had brought them here. They spent the morning making lists. What needed immediate attention? What could wait? What supplies they'd need from town? Ben had enough saved for basic materials, but every dollar would have to count. Noah helped by sketching room layouts and measuring spaces with a piece of string they found in the truck's glove compartment. Around noon, they walked the property boundaries, following the creek as it wound through aspens and pines. The land was bigger than Ben had imagined, nearly 5 acres of mixed forest and meadow, with the cabin positioned to take advantage of morning sun and shelter from prevailing winds. Someone had chosen this spot with care, understanding how the seasons would move across the landscape. "Dad, what's that?" Noah pointed to a rectangular depression in the ground near the tree line, barely visible under decades of fallen leaves and undergrowth. Ben kicked away debris, revealing the outline of what had once been a foundation. Stone corners emerged from the earth, marking a structure maybe 20 feet square. Whatever had stood here was long gone, but the bones remained. "Looks like there used to be another building here," Ben said. "Maybe a shed or workshop." Noah was already sketching the foundation in his notebook, his pencil capturing the geometric lines with surprising accuracy. The boy had an eye for details that impressed Ben. The way shadows fell across broken stone, how tree roots had grown around, and through the old foundation, reclaiming it for the forest. That afternoon, they drove to Cedar Ridge for supplies. The hardware store occupied half of a building that also housed the town's only restaurant, and the owner, a weathered man named Pete Garrison, seemed to know everyone's business before they walked through his door. "So you're living in the dollar cabin now?" he said as Ben loaded cleaning supplies into a shopping cart. It wasn't a question. "That's right. You know why nobody else wanted it? Because it needs work." Pete studied Ben with the careful attention of a man who'd sized up plenty of strangers over the years. "That cabin's got history. Samuel Whitmore built it back in 37, right before he disappeared. Folks around here have long memories about things that don't add up." Noah looked up from a display of pocket knives. "What happened to him?" "Nobody knows for sure, son. One day he was there working on that place, bringing in supplies, talking to folks in town. Next day he was gone. Truck found abandoned down by the river, but no sign of Samuel himself." Ben felt a chill despite the afternoon warmth. "Did they ever figure out what happened?" Sheriff back then said he probably fell in the water during spring runoff, but Samuel knew these mountains better than most. Didn't make sense he'd be careless around the river. Pete rang up their purchases with deliberate slowness. Course, that was a long time ago. Maybe it don't matter now. But as they drove back up the mountain road, Ben couldn't shake the feeling that it did matter. Someone had built their cabin with obvious skill and care, then vanished without explanation. The thought added weight to the silence that surrounded. The new home. Evening found them back at the cabin, working to clean the main room's windows before dark. Noah had discovered that the fireplace stones continued up through the ceiling, forming the backbone of the cabin's structure. He traced the patterns with his finger, fascinated by how each stone had been chosen and placed. "Dad, look at this," he called from where he knelt beside the hearth. "This stone is different from the others." Ben joined him, studying the section Noah had found. One stone, about the size of a shoebox and positioned at eye level when kneeling, did look different. Where the other stones were rough and natural, this one had been smoothed and fitted with unusual precision. "You're right. That's strange." Noah pressed against the stone, and to their surprise, it shifted slightly. "It's loose." Working together, they managed to wiggle the stone free from its position. Behind it lay a cavity in the wall, dark and mysterious as a secret. Ben reached inside cautiously, his fingers finding something smooth and flat. Paper, wrapped in what felt like oiled cloth. He drew out a bundle about the size of a book, tied, with string that crumbled at his touch. The oiled cloth fell away to reveal several sheets of paper, yellowed with age but still intact. At the top of the first sheet, in faded blue ink, someone had written, "Cabin Plans, S. Whitmore, 1937. "It's the original blueprint," Ben breathed, spreading the papers carefully on the floor near the fireplace. Noah leaned close, his eyes wide with excitement. "Look at all the rooms. And what are these lines here?" Ben studied the detailed drawings. The plans showed not just the cabin they were living in, but additional structures, the foundation they'd found in the woods, and something else. Underground chambers connected to the main cabin by what looked like tunnels. "I think these are basement rooms," Ben said slowly, "but we haven't seen any basement." The blueprint showed remarkable detail. Measurements, material specifications, even notes about positioning windows to catch optimal light. But it was the underground sections that captured their attention. 3 separate chambers were marked, each connected to the others and to the cabin above by carefully planned passages. "Why would someone need secret rooms?" Noah asked. Ben didn't have an answer, but the question sent another chill down his spine. The cabin had seemed like a simple mountain retreat, a place to start over. Now it was beginning to feel like something much more complex. As they studied the plans by firelight, Noah pointed to something Ben had missed, a signature at the bottom of the main sheet. S. Whitmore, Architect, was written in the same faded ink, but below that, in different handwriting, someone had added, "For the children, 1938. "For the children," Ben read aloud. What children? Outside, the mountain wind picked up, rattling the cabin's windows and sending smoke spiraling down the chimney. The blueprint seemed to pulse in the flickering light, its secrets drawing them deeper into a mystery that had waited nearly 90 years to be discovered. Noah carefully traced the underground chamber drawings with his finger. "Dad, do you think the secret rooms are still there?" Ben looked at his son, at the excitement in his eyes, the way he leaned forward as if the blueprint might reveal more secrets if he just looked hard enough. They'd come to the mountains seeking a fresh start, but it seemed they'd found something much more intriguing. "I don't know, buddy, but I think we're going to find out." The Cedar Ridge Public Library occupied the second floor of the town's community center, accessible by a narrow staircase that creaked with each step. Ben and Noah climbed it the next morning, the blueprint carefully rolled in a tube Noah had fashioned from a cardboard mailing cylinder they'd found in the truck. The library was small but well organized, with shelves that reached from floor to ceiling and windows that looked out over the town's single main street. Martha Henderson sat behind the circulation desk, stamping returned books with the methodical precision of someone who'd been performing the same task for decades. "I wondered when you'd find your way here," she said when she saw them approach. "Most folks who buy the dollar cabin end up with questions sooner or later." "We found something," Noah announced, unable to contain his excitement any longer. "Hidden in the fireplace." Martha's expression grew serious. "Show me." Ben unrolled the blueprint on a reading table near the windows, weighted down with books. Martha provided. In the morning light, the aged paper revealed details they'd missed the night before, measurements written in a careful hand, notes about materials and construction techniques, even small sketches of mechanical details. Martha studied the plans for several minutes, occasionally making soft sounds of recognition or surprise. Finally, she looked up at Ben with eyes that held decades of accumulated knowledge. "I haven't seen these since I was a girl," she said. "My father worked with Samuel Whitmore during the cabin's construction. He used to tell stories about in project how Samuel insisted on building those underground chambers even though it doubled the work." "Your father worked on our cabin?" Noah asked. "Indeed he did. Henry Henderson was the best stonemason in 3 counties, and Samuel wanted only the finest work. They spent weeks just on the foundation, making sure everything was level and secure." Martha traced one of the underground chamber drawings with her finger. "Samuel never told my father what the rooms were for, just that they needed to be hidden, and they needed to last." Ben felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to shift into place. The hardware store owner mentioned that Samuel disappeared. That's right, spring of 1938, just after the cabin was finished. But before that happened, he brought children up there, orphans from Denver, kids who had nowhere else to go. Martha's voice grew soft with memory. "My mother used to send food up to the cabin, said Samuel was trying to give those children a safe place to heal." She moved to a filing cabinet and withdrew a folder thick with newspaper clippings and photographs. "I've been the unofficial keeper of local history for 40 years. Let me show you something." The photographs were black and white, many of them faded, but they told a story that made Ben's chest tighten with emotion. Children of various ages stood in front of the cabin, some smiling, others serious, all of them looking as if they'd experienced more hardship than any child should. Samuel Whitmore appeared in several photos. A tall man with kind eyes and work-roughened hands, always positioned protectively near the children. "This one was taken in the summer of 1937, Martha said, pointing to a photo that showed a group of 8 children helping to build what looked like a garden. Samuel believed that hard work and mountain air could help heal whatever wounds those children carried. Noah studied the photographs with intense concentration. "They look happy. They were, from what my parents told me. Samuel had a gift with troubled children. He understood that sometimes people need to disappear from the world for a while before they can find their place in it again." Martha pulled out another document, a leather-bound journal with a brass clasp and pages that whispered, "Secrets when turned." This belonged to Samuel. "The sheriff returned it to my father after the investigation, said it might contain clues about where Samuel had gone. But my father could never bring himself to read it." She handed the journal to Ben, with the solemnity of someone passing along a sacred trust. "Maybe it's time someone did." The journal's pages were filled with Samuel's careful handwriting, documenting not just the cabin's construction, but his thoughts about the children he was helping. Ben read several entries aloud while Noah followed along. March 15th, 1937. "Little Mary still wakes screaming in the night. The other children comfort her without being asked. They understand each other's pain in ways adults never could." April 3rd, 1937. "Tommy discovered the creek today. First time I've seen him smile. Water has healing properties beyond what most people understand. Note, expand the bedroom plans to include direct access to the creek side." In May 20th, 1937. "The underground chambers are nearly complete. Henry Henderson outdid himself with the stonework. These rooms will provide safety if the children ever need to disappear completely. Some secrets are worth protecting with your life." Ben looked up to find Martha watching him with an expression that mixed sadness with something that might have been hope. "Samuel was protecting those children from something," she said. "We never knew what exactly. But there were rumors. People looking for runaways, officials who didn't understand what Samuel was trying to accomplish. He built those hidden rooms as a last resort." "What happened to the children when Samuel disappeared?" Noah asked. "They were taken back to Denver. placed in different institutions. My parents tried to keep track of some of them over the years, but it wasn't easy. The system back then wasn't kind to children who didn't fit the mold. Ben continued reading from the journal, finding entries that detailed Samuel's growing concern about outside threats. June 10th, 1937. 2 men came asking questions in town today. They claimed to be from the county welfare office, but something about them felt wrong. Martha's father warned me to be careful. Note, accelerate work on the sanctuary chamber. July 4th, 1937, Independence Day. The children performed a play they wrote themselves about freedom and finding home. I've never been more proud or more worried. Their joy makes them visible, and visibility brings danger. August 15th, 1937. The final chamber is complete. Hidden entrance through the root cellar, accessible only from inside the cabin. If the worst happens, the children will have somewhere safe to hide. The combination lock mechanism is simple enough for a child, but complex enough to fool an adult who doesn't know the pattern. Martha leaned forward. Combination lock? Ben showed her the journal entry, and she nodded slowly. That explains the mechanical drawings in the blueprint. Samuel was an engineer before he became a humanitarian. He understood that the best hiding places are hidden in plain sight. They spent another hour going through the journal and photographs, piecing together the story of Samuel Whitmore's mission. He'd been a wealthy man who'd lost his own family in a factory fire, then dedicated his remaining years to saving other people's children. The cabin wasn't just a retreat, it was a sanctuary for kids who needed to disappear from a world that had failed them. The last entry is dated March 20th, 1938. Ben noted, reading from the journal's final page. Listen to this. They're getting closer. I can feel them watching the cabin, waiting for their chance. The children are scared, but trying to be brave. If something happens to me, I've left everything they need to stay safe. The mountain will protect them as it protected me. Look for the compass in the well. It will guide them to safety. Noah grabbed Ben's arm. Dad, remember yesterday when we were cleaning? You said the well looked like someone had been using it recently. Ben felt his pulse quicken. Samuel Whitmore had vanished 87 years ago, but his final message suggested he'd left something behind, something that might still be waiting in the cabin's well. Martha, Ben said carefully, has anyone else lived in the cabin since Samuel disappeared? No one permanent. A few folks tried over the years, but they never stayed long. Said the place felt too full of memories. She closed the journal and handed it back to Ben. But memories aren't always a burden. Sometimes they're a gift. As they prepared to leave the library, Martha pulled out one more photograph. This one showed Samuel Whitmore standing alone beside the cabin, his hand resting on a wooden post that marked the property boundary. In the background, barely visible, was the well. Take this with you, she said. Samuel deserves to have his story told, even if it's just to a father and son who were brave enough to make his cabin their home. The well stood about 50 yards from the cabin's back door, partially hidden by wild raspberry canes that had grown thick and tangled over decades of neglect. Ben had noticed it during their first exploration of the property, but dismissed it as just another piece of the cabin's rustic infrastructure. Now, carrying Samuel Whitmore's journal and the knowledge of his final message, the well took on entirely different significance. Look for the compass in the well, Noah recited as they approached the circular stone structure. Dad, what if it's still there? The well had been covered with weathered planks and chicken wire, probably to prevent accidents. Ben pried away the covering carefully, revealing a shaft that disappeared into darkness. The stonework was similar to the cabin's construction, carefully fitted rocks that had remained solid despite years of weather and neglect. I'm going to lower the bucket and see what we find, Ben said, testing the rope that still hung from the well's wooden frame. The rope looked newer than everything else, as if someone had replaced it in recent years. Noah leaned over the well's edge, his voice echoing as he called down into the depths. "Hello down there! Any compasses hiding in a well?" His words came back to them multiplied, bouncing off stone walls in a way that suggested the well was deeper than Ben had expected. He lowered the bucket slowly, counting rope lengths. 20 feet, 30, 40. The bucket finally hit something with a solid thunk. "Got bottom," Ben announced. But when he tried to pull the bucket back up, it felt heavier than it should have. The bucket emerged, dripping with clear mountain water, but nestled in the bottom, wrapped in oiled leather and tied with string, was a package about the size of a coffee can. Ben lifted it out carefully, noting that despite its long submersion, the leather wrapping had kept its contents completely dry. Noah quotes, eyes widened as Ben untied the string. "It's really there. Samuel Whitmore left something for us in the well." Inside the leather wrapping was a brass compass, its face green with age, but its needle still true. The compass was beautiful in the way that tools used to be beautiful, functional, precise, and built to last generations. But it was what accompanied the compass that made them both catch their breath. Rolled around the compass, like a protective sleeve, was a map drawn on heavy paper, marked with compass directions and what appeared to be pacing instructions. From the well, 47 steps northeast to the lightning-struck pine. From the pine, 23 steps due north to the flat boulder. From the boulder, 15 steps northwest to the marker stone. "It's a treasure map," Noah whispered, his voice filled with wonder. Ben studied the map more carefully. The drawing was detailed and precise, showing not just directions but landmarks. The creek's bend, a distinctive rock formation, even the foundation ruins they'd discovered on their first day. Samuel Whitmore had created a guide to something hidden on the property, something he'd thought important enough to preserve in the depths of a well. "Should we follow it now?" Noah asked, practically vibrating with excitement. "Let's gather some. Supplies first. If we're going treasure hunting, we should do it right." They returned to the cabin for flashlights, a shovel, and Noah's sketchbook. Ben also grabbed the journal, thinking that Samuel's own words might provide clues about what they were searching for. The afternoon was warm and clear, with the kind of mountain light that made every tree and stone stand out in sharp detail. Following the compass proved easier than Ben had expected. The brass needle pointed true north with unwavering precision, and the landmarks Samuel had noted were still clearly visible despite 8 decades of forest growth. The lightning-struck pine stood exactly where the map indicated, its trunk split and weathered, but still recognizable. Noah counted steps with the precision of a trained surveyor, using his 10-year-old stride to match what would have been a child's measurements on the original map. 45, 46, 47, there's the pine. From the pine to the flat boulder, the path led through a grove of aspens, whose leaves whispered overhead like secrets being shared. The boulder was unmistakable. A piece of granite the size of a small car, perfectly flat on top, as if nature had provided a table for giants. 15 steps northwest, Ben read from the map, while Noah used the compass to establish their direction. The final steps led them to what looked like an ordinary patch of forest floor covered with pine needles and fallen leaves. But when Ben kicked away the debris, he revealed a stone marker, a carved piece of granite about the size of a bread loaf with symbols etched into its surface. Noah knelt beside the marker, tracing the carved symbols with his finger. "These looked like the same marks that were on the well's stones, and look," he pointed to one side of the marker. "There's a small hole, like something's supposed to fit in it." Ben examined the hole more closely. It was perfectly round and about the depth of his finger, clearly intentional, rather than natural wear. "I think this is where the compass fits." He inserted the brass compass into the hole, and with a soft click that seemed to echo through the forest, the stone marker shifted. Not dramatically, just enough to reveal that it wasn't a solid piece of granite, but a carefully crafted lid covering something beneath. Together, they lifted the marker stone, revealing a metal box buried just below the surface. The box was made of the same weathered brass as the compass, and despite its decades underground, it opened with only a slight protest from its hinges, inside comma, wrapped in more oiled leather. They found a collection that told the story of Samuel Whitmore's final months. There were photographs of the children who'd lived at the cabin, not just the formal group shots Ben had seen at the library, but candid images that captured moments of joy and healing. A girl reading by the fireplace, boys building a fort from fallen logs, children helping each other with lessons written on a slate board. But it was the letter that made Ben's hands tremble as he unfolded it. Written in Samuel's careful script, it was addressed to whoever finds this treasure and to the children who need sanctuary. "Read it out loud, Dad," Noah said, settling beside Ben on the forest floor. "If you are reading this," Ben began, "then either I have vanished as I fear I must, or enough time has passed that it is safe to reveal what I have hidden. The children who lived in the cabin taught me that home is not a place but a feeling, the knowledge that you are safe, loved and free to become who you were meant to be." Ben paused, struck by how perfectly those words described what he hoped to build with Noah in their mountain sanctuary. "I have hidden something of great value on this property, not because I love money, but because I know that good people sometimes need resources to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The invention I completed shortly before my disappearance has the power to help many people, but in the wrong hands, it could cause great harm." Noah leaned closer. "What kind of invention?" Ben continued reading. "I have divided the location into 3 parts, each hidden separately, each requiring the next to make sense. This compass will guide you to the first marker. When you find all 3, you will understand not just where to look, but why the search matters." The letter went on to describe Samuel's growing fear that dangerous men were closing in on the cabin and the children under his protection. He'd hidden his life's work, an invention he described only as a way to turn the simplest materials into the most precious resource. Somewhere on the property, along with enough documentation to prove his ownership and the invention's legitimacy. "Remember," Samuel's letter concluded, "treasure is not always gold or silver. Sometimes it is clean water for thirsty children, or warm beds for those who have known only cold ground, or simply the knowledge that someone cared enough to leave something behind." Ben folded the letter carefully, his mind racing with implications. Samuel Whitmore hadn't just been a humanitarian, he'd been an inventor whose work had been valuable enough to kill for. The men who'd driven him into hiding might have succeeded in silencing him, but they hadn't found what they were looking for. Noah was studying the other contents of the brass box. In addition to the photographs and letter, there was a small notebook filled with sketches and calculations, and a brass key attached to a chain. "Dad, look at this page," Noah said, showing Ben a drawing that looked like a mechanical device. "It's some kind of machine, but I don't understand what it does." The sketches were clearly the work of an engineer, precise technical drawings with measurements and annotations. Ben could make out references to filtration chambers and purification cycles, but the overall purpose remained mysterious. "We'll figure it out," Ben said, closing the box and preparing to return to the cabin. "But I think we've found enough excitement for one day." As they walked back through the forest, compass in hand and brass box tucked under Ben's arm, Noah was unusually quiet. Finally, he spoke up. "Dad, do you think Samuel Whitmore left all this for us specifically, or just for whoever was brave enough to look?" Ben considered the question as they emerged from the trees and saw their cabin waiting. "In the afternoon light, I think he left it for people who needed it, buddy. People like us, who were looking for a new start and ended up finding something much bigger than we expected." Noah nodded, satisfied with that answer. "Then we'd better make sure we're worthy of it." The brass key led them to a discovery that changed everything they thought they knew about their mountain sanctuary. Following Samuel's detailed instructions from the notebook they'd found with the compass, Ben and Noah located the second marker 30 paces due east from the flat boulder, buried beneath what had once been a carefully maintained flower garden. The key fit perfectly into a lock mechanism hidden inside a hollow log that looked natural but had clearly been crafted to conceal its purpose. When Ben turned the key, a section of the log swung open like a door, revealing a waterproof container that had preserved its contents for nearly 90 years. Inside the container was a hand-carved wooden box, about the size of a shoebox, but much heavier than Ben expected. The wood was dark with age and smooth from handling, decorated with intricate carvings that seemed to tell a story in pictures. Children playing, adults working together, hands reaching out to help one another. "It's beautiful," Noah breathed, running his fingers over the carved surface. "Look, Dad, this picture shows the cabin, and these are children standing in front of it." Ben opened the box carefully, mindful that whatever lay inside had been important, enough for Samuel Whitmore to preserve with such care. The contents took his breath away. Photographs filled most of the space, not just the formal portraits they'd seen before, but intimate moments that captured the daily life of the children who'd called the cabin home. A girl braiding another, child's hair by the fireplace, boys teaching younger kids to fish in the creek, teenagers helping with construction work, their faces serious with responsibility and bright with purpose. But it was the written accounts that made Ben's throat tighten. With emotion, letters from the children to Samuel, thanking him for saving their lives, describing dreams they'd never dared to have before finding sanctuary in the mountains. School assignments written on brown paper, showing careful penmanship and minds hungry for knowledge. Birthday cards made from pressed flowers and decorated with heartfelt messages. "Listen to this one," Ben said, reading from a letter signed by someone named Margaret, aged 14. "Dear Mr. Samuel, before I came to the cabin, I thought I would never feel safe anywhere. But here, surrounded by mountains and other children who understand, I've learned that family isn't just people who share your blood. Sometimes family is people who choose to protect you when you can't protect yourself." Noah studied a photograph showing children working in what must have been an impressive vegetable garden. "They were really happy here, weren't they? It looks that way." Samuel created something special, a place where kids who'd been hurt could heal and learn to trust again. Among the photographs and letters was a folded document that Ben recognized as legal paperwork. When he opened it, he found a deed transferring ownership of the cabin and surrounding property to the Children's Mountain Trust, established for the protection and education of orphaned and displaced youth. He gave the cabin to the children. Ben realized, reading through the carefully worded legal language, this says the property belongs to a trust established to help kids who need a safe place to grow up. The deed was dated March 15th, 1938, just 5 days before Samuel's final journal entry. He'd known he was in danger, but instead of running, he'd spent his last days ensuring that his sanctuary would survive, even if he didn't quote T. At the bottom of the wooden box, wrapped in silk that had somehow remained intact, was a photograph larger than the others. It showed Samuel Whitmore surrounded by 23 children of various ages, all standing in front of the cabin on what appeared to be a perfect summer day. Everyone was smiling, not the forced smiles of a formal portrait, but the genuine expressions of people who belong together. On the back of the photograph, in Samuel's handwriting, was a message that made Ben's eyes water. "To my mountain family, who taught me that love multiplies when you share it, and that hope is the most renewable resource on earth, may this place always be a sanctuary for those who need one." Samuel Whitmore, July 4th, 1937. Noah pointed to one face in the photograph, a girl of about 12 with serious eyes and a protective arm around a smaller child. "She looks familiar." Ben studied the face Noah had indicated, then pulled out his wallet and showed Noah the photograph Martha Henderson had given them at the library. The resemblance was unmistakable. That's Martha's mother, Ben realized. She was one of Samuel's children. The revelation sent a chill down Ben's spine. Martha Henderson hadn't just been the local librarian with an interest in history. She was one of the children Samuel Whitmore had saved. She'd been living with the secret of her childhood sanctuary for 8 decades, waiting for someone worthy to discover the truth. "Dad, look at this," Noah said, pulling a sealed envelope from the very bottom of the box. The envelope was marked, "For the new guardians." In Samuel's distinctive handwriting, inside the envelope was a letter that seemed to speak directly to their situation. "To whoever finds this collection, I hope you understand that you have inherited more than just property. You have become guardians of a sacred trust, the promise that this mountain sanctuary will always be available to children who need safety, healing, and hope." Ben continued reading aloud. "The children you see in these photographs went on to lead lives of purpose and generosity. They became teachers and doctors, artists and farmers, parents who raised their own children with the love they learned in these mountains. They carry the sanctuary with them wherever they go. And now they pass that gift on to the next generation." The letter went on to describe Samuel's vision for the future, not just the cabin's future, but a larger mission of protecting vulnerable children that could extend far beyond the mountains of Colorado. "I have hidden something of great value on this property, as my previous letter indicated, but the true treasure is not what you will find buried in the earth. It is what you will build in the hearts of those who find sanctuary here. Use the resources I have left behind to continue this work, and know that every child who finds safety in these mountains honors the memory of those who came before." Noah was studying the deed again, sounding out the legal language with the determination of someone much older than 10. "Dad, what does this mean, in perpetuity for the benefit of displaced children?" "It means forever, buddy. Samuel set up the cabin so it would always belong to kids who need a safe place. But we're living here now. Does that make us guardians?" Ben considered the question, looking around at the forest that had hidden Samuel's secrets for so long, then down at his son who'd shown such courage and wisdom throughout their adventure. "I think it does. I think that's exactly what it makes us." As evening approached, they returned to the cabin carrying the wooden box and its precious contents. The day's discoveries had given them a deeper understanding of their new home's purpose, but also raised new questions about their responsibilities as inheritors of Samuel Whitmore's legacy. They built their evening fire with special care, knowing that the same fireplace had warmed generations of children who'd found refuge from a difficult world. The flames painted dancing shadows on stone walls that had witnessed decades of healing and growth, and Ben felt the weight of being entrusted with something much larger than a simple mountain retreat. "Dad," Noah said, as they settled into their sleeping bags near the fire, "do you think other kids will come to live here with us?" Ben looked at his son, at the boy who'd handled their family's crisis with such grace, who'd thrown himself into the mystery of Samuel's legacy with enthusiasm and wisdom, who'd already begun to understand that home meant more than just having a roof over your head. "I don't know what the future holds, Noah, but I think Samuel would be proud of us for asking that question." Noah nodded and pulled his sketchbook from beside his sleeping bag. By firelight, he began drawing their day's adventure, the compass emerging from the well, the carved marker stone, the wooden box with its precious photographs. But in the margin of his drawing, Ben noticed Noah had sketched something that hadn't happened yet. Other children playing around the cabin, their faces bright with the same hope Ben had seen in Samuel's photographs. Maybe that was the real treasure Samuel had left behind, not just the promise of financial security, but the vision of what their mountain sanctuary could become again. The third day of their treasure hunt began with disappointment. Following Samuel's increasingly cryptic clues, Ben and Noah had searched for hours around the foundation ruins they'd discovered on their first day, using the compass and notebook to guide their exploration. They'd found the third marker Exactly. Where Samuel's instructions indicated, but when they'd opened the final hiding place, it contained only a note and what appeared to be a complex mechanical device. The device was about the size of a cigar box, made of brass and steel with intricate gears and dials that suggested sophisticated engineering. But despite Noah's enthusiasm for solving puzzles and Ben's construction experience with machinery, they couldn't determine its purpose or even how to operate it. "It's like a puzzle box," Noah said, turning the device over in his hands. "But I can't figure out what makes it work." The note that accompanied the device was written in Samuel's handwriting, but the message was frustratingly vague. "The final key is hidden where children learned their most important lessons. Look for the place where knowledge was shared, where minds grew strong, and where hope was taught as carefully as mathematics." They'd searched every obvious location: the cabin's main room where Samuel might have conducted lessons, the loft where children would have slept and studied, even the outdoor areas where practical skills might have been taught. But nothing they found seemed to match Samuel's description of a place dedicated to learning. It was Noah who made the connection, and it came to him while he was sketching in his notebook during their lunch break by the creek. "Dad, look at this picture from the wooden box," he said, pulling out one of the photographs they'd found the day before. "See how the older kids are teaching the younger ones. They're not just sitting around, they're all holding books and slates, and they're sitting in a circle." Ben studied the photograph more carefully. Noah was right. The children were clearly engaged in a formal lesson, but the setting didn't look like any part of the cabin he'd seen. "Look at the background," Noah continued excitedly. "Those aren't the cabin walls behind them. Those are stone walls, but they're different stones, more like the ones we found around that old foundation." Ben felt his pulse quicken. The foundation. Ruins they'd explored weren't just the remains of a storage building or workshop. They were what remained of Samuel's schoolhouse, the place where the children of the mountain sanctuary had received their education. They returned to the foundation site with renewed purpose, this time looking not just for hidden objects, but for clues about how the structure had been used. What Ben had initially dismissed as random debris began to make sense when viewed through the lens of education. Fragments of slate boards, rusted metal that might have been desk hardware, even a few pieces of what looked like scientific equipment. "Here, Dad!" Noah called from the far corner of the foundation. "There's something carved into this stone." Ben joined his son beside a large cornerstone that bore clear evidence of deliberate carving. Most of the text had been weathered away, but enough remained to read Mountain School, and below that, a date, 1937. "This was their classroom," Ben said with growing excitement. "Samuel built a separate building just for education." They began a more systematic search of the ruins, and within an hour, Noah's keen eyes spotted something Ben had missed completely. In the center of what would have been the schoolhouse floor, a circle of stones had been arranged differently from the foundation walls. Smaller stones, fitted together with mathematical precision. When they cleared away decades of accumulated debris, the stone circle revealed itself to be covering a space below ground level. Working together, they managed to shift several of the stones, revealing a cylindrical chamber lined with the same expert stonework they'd seen throughout Samuel's construction. "It's like a time capsule," Noah breathed as Ben lowered himself into the chamber. With a flashlight. The space was small but completely dry, clearly designed to preserve whatever had been stored inside. And what Ben found there took his breath away. Books. Dozens of them, wrapped in oiled cloth and stacked on wooden shelves that had been built into the stone walls. But these weren't just any books, they were textbooks, scientific journals, technical manuals and volumes on subjects ranging from engineering to medicine to agriculture. Samuel Whitmore had created a library that would have been impressive in any major city, let alone a remote mountain sanctuary. But it was what lay on a stone ledge at the back of the chamber that made Ben's hands tremble as he reached for it. A mechanical device identical to the one they'd found at the third marker, but this one was connected to what looked like a miniature laboratory. Glass tubes, metal fittings, and a hand-cranked mechanism that suggested the entire apparatus had been designed for demonstration purposes. "Noah, I need you to come down here and see this," Ben called up to his son Dot. The chamber was large enough for both of them to stand comfortably, and Noah's eyes went wide as he took in the scope of Samuel's hidden library and laboratory. "It's like a secret science classroom," he whispered, running his hands over the book spines with reverence. Ben lifted the demonstration device carefully from its shelf, noting that unlike the puzzle box they'd been struggling with, this version had clear labels and instruction plates. When he placed the two devices side by side, their purpose became obvious. They were designed to work together, one as a teacher's demonstration model and the other as a student's hands-on learning tool. The instruction plates were engraved with Samuel's careful handwriting, water purification system, patent pending 1937, for the demonstration of converting contaminated water into safe drinking water using natural filtration materials and mechanical pressure systems. "It's a water purifier," Ben said, understanding flooding through him. "Samuel invented a way to clean dirty water and turn it into something safe to drink." Noah was studying the demonstration model, his natural curiosity overcoming any intimidation he might have felt about the complex mechanism. "Look, Dad, there's a place to pour water in the top, and it comes out clean down here, but what makes it work?" Ben found the answer in a detailed manual that lay beside the devices. Samuel's invention used a combination of natural filtering materials, sand, charcoal, and certain types of stone, combined with a mechanical system that created pressure to force water through multiple purification stages. The design was brilliant in its simplicity and devastating in its potential impact. "Do you understand what this means, Noah?" Ben asked, his voice filled with awe. In 1937, most of the world didn't have access to clean drinking water. Samuel invented a machine that could solve that problem, using materials that anyone could find. Noah nodded slowly, beginning to grasp the magnitude of their discovery. And that's why those bad men were after him. They wanted to steal his invention, or stop him from giving it away to people who needed it, Ben agreed. Samuel wasn't trying to get rich from this. He was trying to save lives. They spent the rest of the afternoon exploring the underground library, finding not just Samuel's water purification research, but evidence of a broader educational mission. There were lesson plans for teaching everything from basic literacy to advanced engineering, medical texts that would have allowed someone with training to provide healthcare in remote areas, and agricultural manuals focused on growing food in challenging mountain conditions. Most importantly, they found Samuel's complete patent application for the water purification system, dozens of pages of technical drawings, performance specifications, and legal documentation that proved his ownership of the invention. The papers were dated February 1938, just weeks before his disappearance. He never got to file the patent, Ben realized, reading through the application. The men who were after him prevented him from making it official. At the bottom of the patent application, Samuel had written a personal note that made Ben's chest tight with emotion. "This invention belongs not to me, but to any child who has ever known the thirst that comes from having no safe water to drink. I dedicate this work to the children of my mountain sanctuary, and to all the children who will benefit from clean water in the years to come. May this device bring health and hope to places where both are desperately needed." As evening approached, and they prepared to climb back out of the hidden chamber, Noah made one more discovery that tied everything together. Behind the demonstration device, carved directly into the stone wall, were the words, "For the children," and below that, a series of numbers that Ben recognized as coordinates. "Dad, I think this is telling us where to find the real treasure." Noah said, copying the numbers into his sketchbook with careful precision. Ben looked at the coordinates, then at the incredible collection of books, scientific equipment, and documentation they'd discovered. Samuel Whitmore had built more than a mountain sanctuary. He'd created a complete educational and humanitarian center designed to help children not just survive, but thrive in a world that had failed them. And now, almost 90 years later, a father and son who'd lost everything had inherited the responsibility of deciding what to do with Samuel's legacy. The coordinates carved into the schoolhouse wall led them to a location that changed everything Ben thought he knew about Samuel. Whitmore's disappearance. Using the GPS function on his phone, he and Noah hiked deeper into the mountains than they'd ever gone before, following a deer trail that wound through increasingly dense forest until it opened into a hidden valley completely invisible from any other approach. In the center of the valley, concealed by a grove of ancient pines, stood the ruins of what had once been a substantial building. Unlike the simple stone construction of the cabin and schoolhouse, this structure showed evidence of more sophisticated engineering, concrete foundations, steel reinforcement, and the remains of what looked like industrial equipment. "What is this place, Dad?" Noah asked as they approached the ruins. Ben was wondering the same thing. The building's remains suggested it had been much larger than anything else Samuel had constructed, and far more complex. Twisted metal and broken concrete spoke of destruction that had been both sudden and violent. It was Noah who found the first clue to the building's purpose, a metal sign, partially buried under decades of fallen leaves, that read, "Whitmore Water Systems, Research and Development Facility, authorized personnel only." Samuel had a factory here, Ben realized, looking around the ruins with new understanding. He wasn't just inventing a water purification system, he was getting ready to manufacture it. They spent an hour exploring the site, finding evidence of Samuel's ambitious plans scattered among the debris. Remnants of assembly equipment, fragments of the brass and steel components they'd seen in the demonstration models, and most tellingly, a loading dock that suggested Samuel had been preparing to ship his invention to locations around the world. But it was what Noah discovered in a blast-resistant vault at the building's center that revealed the true scope of Samuel's work, and the reason for his disappearance. The vault door had been blown open from the outside, its heavy steel twisted and blackened by what must have been a massive explosion. Inside, scattered across the floor like evidence of interrupted urgency, were hundreds of documents that told the story of Samuel Whitmore's final months. Patent applications for dozens of variations on his water purification system, correspondence with humanitarian organizations around the world, orders for equipment from places Ben had never heard of, remote villages in Africa, South America, Asia, all places where clean water was a matter of life and death. "Dad, look at these letters," Noah said, holding up a stack of correspondence. With shaking hands, the letters were from government officials, military contractors, and corporate executives, all making increasingly aggressive offers to buy Samuel's invention. The amounts mentioned were staggering, millions of dollars for exclusive rights to a technology that could solve one of humanity's most pressing problems. But it was Samuel's responses that revealed his character and sealed his fate. Letter after letter showed him refusing the offers, explaining that his invention was meant to be freely shared with those who needed it most, not sold to the highest bidder. One letter, dated March 10th, 1938, was particularly chilling. "Mr. Whitmore, this is a final offer. The Strategic Materials Corporation is prepared to pay $15 million for all rights to your water purification technology, along with an agreement that you will not develop similar technologies in the future. We strongly advise you to accept this offer. Continued refusal to negotiate may result in consequences you have not considered." Samuel's reply was found paper-clipped to the threat. "Gentlemen, I have considered all consequences, and I choose to stand with the children of the world who die daily from preventable waterborne diseases. My invention will be freely shared with humanitarian organizations, not sold to corporations that would price it beyond the reach of those who need it most. I am prepared to face whatever consequences my conscience demands. Ben felt a chill run down his spine as he realized what they were looking at, evidence that Samuel Whitmore hadn't simply disappeared. He'd been murdered for refusing to sell out the children he'd dedicated his life to protecting. They killed him, didn't they? Noah said quietly, his young voice heavy with the weight of understanding. I think so, buddy. I think Samuel knew it was going to happen, and that's why he hid everything for us to find. The final document in the vault was a letter addressed to whoever discovers the truth about my fate, written in Samuel's handwriting but dated March 19th, 1938, one day before his final journal entry. By the time you read this, I will likely be dead, Ben read aloud, his voice barely steady. The men who have been threatening me have made it clear that they will not allow my invention to reach the people who need it most. They see only profit, where I see the possibility of saving lives. The letter went on to detail Samuel's final preparations. I have hidden the complete manufacturing specifications for the water purification system in a location known only to me. The children's safety was my first priority, so I sent them away yesterday, telling them I would join them in Denver once my business was concluded. They must never know the danger they were in simply by living under my protection. Ben's hands trembled as he continued reading, To whoever finds this evidence, I ask you to complete the work I could not finish. The manufacturing specifications are hidden in a place that represents everything I believed in, where knowledge was preserved, where hope was nurtured, and where the future was protected even when the present seemed lost. Noah was studying the vault's interior with the focused attention he brought to all puzzles. Dad, look at these burn marks on the walls. They're not from the explosion that opened the door. They're older, and they form a pattern. Ben examined the marks Noah had noticed, realizing his son was right. The burns were arranged in what looked almost like a map, with lines radiating from a central point toward what appeared to be specific locations. It's a direction finder, Ben realized. Samuel burned a map into the vault walls, showing where he hid the final piece of the puzzle. The burned lines pointed consistently toward one direction, back toward the cabin and the schoolhouse, but at an angle that suggested something they hadn't yet discovered. As they prepared to leave the destroyed facility, Noah made one more discovery that confirmed their worst fears about Samuel's fate. Hidden under debris near the vault entrance was a metal plate, partially melted but still readable. Samuel Whitmore, 1887 to 1938. He died protecting children. They made a memorial for him, Noah said, his voice filled with sadness and respect. No, Ben replied, understanding suddenly flooding through him. Samuel made this himself. He knew what was going to happen, and he wanted to make sure someone would eventually know the truth. The memorial plate bore one final message, etched in small letters around its edge. The greatest treasure is not what you find, but what you choose to do with it. As they hiked back toward the cabin in the failing light, Ben's mind raced with the implications of what they'd discovered. Samuel Whitmore had been murdered for refusing to profit from an invention that could save millions of lives. His killers had destroyed his factory and scattered his research, thinking they'd buried his life's work forever. But Samuel had outmaneuvered them. He'd hidden everything they needed to continue his mission, trusting that someday, someone with the right motivations would piece together his legacy and finish what he'd started. Dad, Noah said as they reached the familiar clearing where their cabin waited, are we going to do what Samuel wanted? Are we going to help finish his work? Ben looked at his son, at the boy who'd helped him solve every puzzle, who'd understood instinctively that their mountain sanctuary was about much more than their own fresh start, who'd shown wisdom far beyond his 10 years throughout there. Incredible adventure. Yes, Noah, we're going to finish what Samuel started. But first, we need to find where he hid those manufacturing specifications. Noah smiled. The same expression of determined hope Ben had seen in the photographs of Samuel's children from 87 years ago. I think I know where to look, Noah said, pulling out his sketchbook and showing Ben a drawing he'd made while they were in the underground library. Remember what Samuel's letter said about knowledge being preserved and hope being nurtured? What if he hid the specifications inside the books themselves? Noah's intuition proved correct in ways that left Ben speechless. They returned to the underground library chamber as dawn broke over the mountains, carrying flashlights and a renewed sense of purpose. This time, instead of admiring Samuel's impressive collection of books, they examined them with the methodical attention of detectives following their most important lead. It was in a volume titled Engineering Solutions for Humanitarian Applications, a book that Samuel had clearly written himself, that they found the first hidden compartment. Carefully hollowed pages, concealed rolled documents that Ben recognized immediately as detailed manufacturing specifications, complete with supply chain information, quality control procedures, and distribution plans for delivering water purification systems to communities around the world. Dad, there are more books like this, Noah said, running his hands along the spines with growing excitement. Look. This whole shelf has books that feel different when you lift them. Over the next 3 hours, they discovered that Samuel had converted nearly 24 books into hiding places for different aspects of his invention. Manufacturing specifications in the engineering text, financial planning documents hidden in a book about mountain agriculture, legal paperwork establishing a foundation for distributing the technology concealed inside a volume of children's stories. But it was the final hidden compartment, found in a book titled Building a Better World for Children, that contained the most important document of all, Samuel's complete business plan for transforming his invention into a global humanitarian initiative. The plan was breathtaking in its scope and heartbreaking in its humanitarian focus. Samuel had envisioned a network of small manufacturing facilities, each capable of producing water purification systems, using locally available materials and training local workers in maintenance and operation. Instead of selling the technology for profit, he'd planned to give it away to communities that needed it most, funding the operation through donations from those who could afford to support the work. Listen to this, Ben said, reading from Samuel's meticulously detailed proposal. The goal is not to build a company, but to build hope. Every child who drinks clean water because of this technology represents a victory against the forces that profit from human suffering. The financial projections showed that Samuel's approach would have been economically sustainable while remaining true to his humanitarian mission. He'd calculated costs for materials, training, transportation, and ongoing support, then identified funding sources ranging from religious organizations to progressive government agencies to wealthy individuals who shared his vision. He had it all figured out, Noah said with admiration. Samuel knew exactly how to help people. But as impressive as the manufacturing plans were, it was Samuel's personal reflections that revealed the depth of his commitment. In margins throughout the business plan, he'd written notes that showed his thinking about the larger implications of his work. Technology is only as valuable as the wisdom that guides its use. We must ensure that those who receive these systems understand not just how to operate them, but why access to clean water is a fundamental human right. The children I've cared for have taught me that hope is contagious. If we can show the world that it's possible to choose compassion over profit, other inventors and entrepreneurs will follow our example. My greatest fear is not that my invention will fail, but that it will succeed in the wrong hands. Corporate ownership would turn this life-saving technology into just another way to exploit those who can least afford to be exploited. Ben found himself deeply moved by Samuel's vision, but also daunted by the responsibility it represented. They weren't just inheriting a valuable invention, they were being asked to carry forward a mission that had cost Samuel his life. "Dad, look at this page," Noah said, showing Ben a section he'd missed. "Samuel wrote instructions for us, for whoever found this stuff." The instructions were detailed and practical, showing that Samuel had thought carefully about how his legacy should be continued. "To the guardians who discover this work, you have a choice to make. You can use this technology to create personal wealth, or you can honor the children who inspired its creation by ensuring it reaches those who need it most. If you choose the path of service, the following steps will guide you toward fulfilling this mission." What followed was a step-by-step plan for authenticating the patents, establishing the humanitarian foundation, and beginning production of water purification systems. Samuel had even included contact information for lawyers, engineers, and humanitarian organizations that had agreed to help implement his vision, though Ben realized most of those contacts would be long dead after 87 years. "The hardest part," Ben said, reading through Samuel's implementation strategy, "will be proving that we have legitimate ownership of this technology. Samuel never got to file his patents, and we'll need to establish legal rights before we can start manufacturing anything." Noah was studying the patent documents with the intense focus he brought to challenging puzzles. "But we have all his research, right? And the proof that other people tried to steal it from him? And the deed that makes us guardians of his trust?" Ben nodded, realizing that his 10-year-old son had grasped something important. They didn't just have Samuel's invention, they had evidence of a crime that had prevented him from sharing it with the world. That evidence might be enough to establish their legal and moral right to continue his work. As afternoon shadows began to lengthen in the valley, they carried the documents back to the cabin and spread them across the floor in front of the fireplace, where it had all begun. The scope of Samuel's vision was overwhelming, not just the technical brilliance of his invention, but the humanitarian framework he'd created for sharing it responsibly. "Noah, we need to talk about what this means for us," Ben said, settling beside his son near the fire they'd built. "If we decide to do what Samuel wanted, our lives are going to change in ways we can't even imagine. Good ways or bad ways? Both, probably. Good because we'd be helping people who really need help. Bad because it's going to be complicated and difficult, and there might be people who don't want us to succeed." Noah considered this with the seriousness that had impressed Ben throughout their adventure. "Dad, what do you think Samuel would say if he was here right now?" Ben looked around the cabin that had become their sanctuary, thinking about the man who'd built it as a refuge for children who needed safety and hope. "I think he'd say that we have everything we need to make the right choice. Knowledge, resources, and each other." "Then let's do it," Noah said, with the simple confidence that Ben was learning to trust. "Let's finish what Samuel started." Ben felt something shift in his chest, a settling of purpose that he hadn't experienced since before his world had fallen apart months ago. They'd come to the mountains running from failure and disappointment. They'd found not just a home, but a mission that could give meaning to everything they'd lost and everything they were building together. "There's one more thing we need to do first," Ben said, reaching for Samuel's journal. "We need to understand exactly what happened to him and make sure we're prepared for whatever challenges we might face." As evening fell over their mountain sanctuary, father and son began planning not just their immediate next steps, but their strategy for honoring a legacy that had waited nearly 9 decades for the right guardians to discover it. The water purification technology that Samuel Whitmore had died to protect was about to emerge from hiding, and the world was about to learn what one man's refusal to compromise had made possible. But first, they had to make sure they were worthy of the trust Samuel had placed in whoever would eventually find his life's work. The real test wasn't discovering the treasure, it was deciding what to do with it. The journey to retrieve Samuel's original working prototype took them higher into the mountains than Ben had ever imagined possible. Following coordinates from Samuel's final letter, they hiked for 3 hours through terrain that gradually changed, from familiar forest to alpine meadows, then to rocky slopes that required careful navigation and steady nerves. Noah handled the climb with the natural agility of youth, but it was his emotional maturity that impressed Ben most. When they paused to rest at a particularly challenging section of the trail, Noah pulled out his sketchbook and drew not the spectacular mountain views surrounding them, but their cabin far below, a tiny refuge that had become the foundation for something much larger than either of them had dared to imagine. "Dad, do you think we're really ready for this?" Noah asked as they approached the coordinates Samuel had specified. Ben considered the question while studying the rocky outcropping that matched Samuel's detailed description. "I don't know if anyone's ever really ready to change the world, buddy, but I think we're as ready as we can be." The hiding place Samuel had chosen for his prototype was both ingenious and symbolic. A natural cave, almost invisible from any direction, except the exact approach Samuel had documented, opened into a chamber that felt more like a cathedral than a storage space. Smooth stone walls rose to a vaulted ceiling, and a shaft of light from an opening high above illuminated the cave's center like a natural spotlight. In that circle of light sat Samuel Whitmore's masterpiece. The water purification system was larger than Ben had expected, about the size of a refrigerator, but clearly designed for portability. Heavy wooden handles suggested it could be disassembled for transport, and brass plates marked different components with assembly instructions. Even after 87 years in the cave's dry atmosphere, the device looked ready for immediate use. "It's beautiful," Noah whispered, approaching the prototype with the reverence of someone recognizing something truly significant. Ben had to agree. The water purification system was more than just a machine. It was a work of art that demonstrated Samuel's engineering genius and humanitarian vision. Every component had been crafted with precision and care, from the intricate filtering mechanisms to the hand-cranked pressure system that would allow it to operate without electricity. But it was the inscription carved into the device's main housing that made Ben's throat tighten with emotion. "Built with love for children everywhere, that they might never know thirst in a world of abundance." S. Whitmore, 1938. Beside the prototype, preserved in a wooden box that matched the construction of Samuel's cabin, was a complete operating manual written in multiple languages. Samuel had anticipated that his invention would serve communities around the world, and he'd prepared documentation that would allow anyone to understand and maintain the system regardless of their technical background. "Look at this, Dad," Noah said, opening the manual to a page that showed detailed illustrations of the purification process. Samuel drew pictures so that people who can't read could still understand how it works. The manual was a masterpiece of instructional design, combining technical accuracy with accessibility in ways that demonstrated Samuel's understanding of the communities he hoped to serve. Simple diagrams showed how contaminated water entered the system, moved through multiple stages of filtration and purification, and emerged clean enough to drink safely. Performance specifications included in the manual were remarkable for 1938. Technology. Samuel's system could purify up to 50 gallons of water per hour, removing not just sediment and particles, but bacteria and other biological contaminants that cause the diseases killing children around the world. "This would have revolutionized everything," Ben said, studying the technical specifications. "Even today, this technology would be considered advanced. In 1938, it was decades ahead of its time. But as impressive as the engineering was, it was Samuel's broader vision that truly took Ben's breath away. The final section of the manual outlined not just technical operation, but a philosophy for sharing the technology responsibly. "Remember that clean water is not a privilege to be purchased, but a right to be protected. Those who receive this gift have a responsibility to share it with others, ensuring that the circle of hope expands with each community that learns to provide for itself. Noah was exploring the cave while Ben absorbed Samuel's documentation, and his excited voice echoed from a shadowed recess. "Dad, there's more stuff back here." In the cave's deepest chamber, hidden behind a natural stone wall, Noah had discovered Samuel's complete workshop. Tools that looked as sharp and ready as the day they'd been stored. Raw materials for building additional water purification systems. Even a forge that could be used to create the brass and steel components essential to the device's operation. Samuel was planning to manufacture these systems himself, Ben realized, examining the workshop setup. Right here in the mountains, away from the corporate interests that wanted to control his invention. The workshop also contained something that made Ben's heart race with both excitement and trepidation. Evidence that Samuel had successfully completed not just one water purification system, but a dozen identical units in various stages of assembly. He was getting ready to equip an entire network of communities, Ben said, running his hands over devices that represented hope for thousands of children who had died from preventable diseases. Samuel wasn't just an inventor, he was launching a humanitarian revolution. Documentation found in the workshop revealed the scope of Samuel's final plans. Letters from missionary organizations, rural medical clinics and remote schools, all requesting water purification systems for their communities. Samuel had been preparing to ship his completed devices when the men threatening him had finally acted. But it was Noah who made the discovery that tied everything together. A letter addressed to the future guardians of this work, hidden in a drawer of Samuel's workbench. "If you are reading this, then my enemies have succeeded in silencing me, but they have failed to destroy what I built. These water purification systems are ready for immediate deployment to communities that have been waiting too long for help. The addresses and contact information are attached, though you will need to verify which organizations still exist and which communities still need assistance." The letter continued with instructions that showed Samuel had thought carefully about how his work should continue. "I have prepared legal documentation establishing the Whitmore Foundation for Water Access, with headquarters at the mountain cabin and schoolhouse you have inherited. This foundation will own all rights to the water purification technology and will be responsible for ensuring it serves those who need it most." Ben felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders, not as a burden, but as a purpose that finally gave meaning to everything he'd lost and everything he'd found. Samuel Whitmore had prepared them not just to discover his invention, but to continue his mission of choosing compassion over profit. "Dad," Noah said quietly, "I think I understand now why Samuel chose our cabin for his treasure hunt. He wasn't just hiding things from bad people. He was waiting for the right people to find them." Ben looked at his son, at the boy who'd helped him solve every puzzle, who'd understood instinctively that their adventure was about much more than finding hidden treasure, who'd shown wisdom and courage that would have made Samuel proud. "I think you're right, buddy. I think Samuel knew that whoever was meant to find this would be people who needed it as much as the world needs what Samuel created." As they prepared to carefully transport Samuel's prototype and documentation back to the cabin, Ben realized that their real treasure hunt was just beginning. They'd found Samuel's invention, but now they had to prove themselves worthy of the trust he'd placed in whoever would continue his work. The descent from Samuel's mountain workshop proved more challenging than the climb up, weighted down as they were with the most valuable cargo either of them had ever carried. Ben had disassembled the prototype into its major components, distributing the weight between their backpacks, while Noah carefully carried the operating manuals and legal documentation in a waterproof bag. But it wasn't the physical challenge that occupied Ben's thoughts during their careful journey down the mountain. It was the magnitude of what they'd committed themselves to undertaking. Samuel Whitmore had spent years developing his water purification system and humanitarian distribution network. Now, an unemployed construction manager and his 10-year-old son had inherited the responsibility of fulfilling that vision. "Dad, are you scared?" Noah asked during one of their rest stops, his voice carrying the wisdom that consistently surprised Ben. "Terrified," Ben admitted, settling beside his son on a fallen log that provided a perfect view of their cabin valley far below. "But not because I think we can't do it. I'm scared because I think we can, and that means everything in our lives is about to change." Noah nodded thoughtfully, pulling out the certificate of authenticity they'd found with Samuel's prototype. The document was simple but powerful, a notarized statement from Samuel Whitmore declaring his invention complete and ready for humanitarian deployment, along with his signature transferring all rights to the guardians who will continue this work with wisdom and compassion. "Samuel trusted us before he even knew who we were," Noah observed, studying the certificate with the careful attention he brought to important things. "He believed that whoever found his invention would be the right people to use it." "That's a lot of faith to put in strangers," Ben replied, but he was beginning to understand that Samuel's faith hadn't been blind. The treasure hunt had been designed not just to reveal the invention, but to test the character of whoever discovered it. Only people motivated by genuine care for others would have followed every clue, solved every puzzle, and understood the full scope of Samuel's humanitarian mission. As they resumed their descent, Ben found himself thinking about the practical challenges they would face in the coming weeks. Establishing legal ownership of Samuel's patents would require lawyers and documentation. Testing and certifying the water purification systems would need engineers and regulatory approval. Finding communities that needed the technology and establishing distribution networks would demand contacts and resources they didn't yet possess. But with each step down the mountain trail, Ben's confidence grew. They had something more valuable than money or connections. They had a complete system that worked, detailed instructions for replicating it, and legal documentation proving their right to continue Samuel's mission. Most importantly, they had the moral clarity that came from understanding they were fighting for children who couldn't fight for themselves. The cabin appeared through the trees just as afternoon shadows began to lengthen, and Ben felt a surge of homecoming that went beyond simple relief at completing a difficult journey. Their mountain sanctuary wasn't just where they lived. It was the headquarters for a humanitarian mission that could change countless lives. Inside the cabin, they carefully reassembled Samuel's water purification prototype, following his detailed instructions with methodical precision. When the final component clicked into place, they had before them a machine that represented 87 years of deferred hope. "Should we test it?" Noah asked, his excitement barely contained. Ben filled a container with murky water from the creek, adding dirt and debris to make it obviously contaminated. Following Samuel's operating manual, they poured the dirty water into the system's input chamber and began turning the hand crank that powered the purification process. The machine operated exactly as Samuel's documentation promised. Water moved through multiple filtration stages, each component removing different types of contamination, until crystal clear liquid emerged from the output spout. Ben tasted it cautiously, then smiled at Noah with wonder. "It's perfect. Better than any bottled water I've ever had." Noah took his own sip, then began jumping around the cabin with excitement. "It works, Dad. Samuel's invention really works." But beyond the technical success, Ben was struck by the deeper significance of what they'd just witnessed. The dirty water they'd purified could have been drawn from any contaminated source around the world. A village well poisoned by industrial waste, a refugee camp's only water supply, a school's pump that couldn't provide safe drinking water for its students. Samuel's invention could transform any of those situations from tragedy to hope. As evening approached, they spread Samuel's complete documentation across the cabin floor and began planning their next steps. The legal paperwork establishing the Whitmore Foundation would need to be filed with state and federal authorities. The patent applications would require updating and submission to current regulatory standards. Most importantly, they needed to identify communities that could benefit immediately from water purification systems. "Look at this list," Noah said, studying the addresses Samuel had compiled of organizations requesting his help. "Some of these places might still exist." Ben examined the list with growing excitement. While many of the specific contacts would be long gone, the communities and organizations Samuel had identified represented types of locations that would still need clean water access. Rural medical clinics, remote schools, refugee services, disaster relief organizations, all groups that would recognize the value of portable, reliable water purification technology. "We can research which of these organizations still exist," Ben said, "and contact them to see if they're still interested in water purification systems. Even if the original contacts are gone, someone will remember the need that Samuel was trying to address." They worked late into the evening, creating lists and timelines, researching legal requirements and potential funding sources. The scope of work was enormous, but Ben was surprised to find that his construction management experience provided relevant skills for organizing complex projects with multiple moving parts. "Dad," Noah said as they prepared for sleep, "when we start helping people with Samuel's invention, will we tell them the story of how we found it?" Ben considered the question, looking around the cabin that had transformed from desperate shelter to treasure hunt headquarters to humanitarian mission control center. "I think Samuel's story deserves to be told, don't you? People should know about the man who chose to help children instead of getting rich, and who trusted strangers to continue his work." Noah nodded and pulled out his sketchbook, showing Ben a drawing he'd been working on throughout their adventure. The picture showed their cabin surrounded by other buildings, schools, workshops, meeting halls, and filled with children learning and playing and growing strong in the mountain sanctuary Samuel had created. "Is that what you think will happen here?" Ben asked. "Maybe not exactly like this," Noah replied, "but something like it. Samuel built this place for children who needed help, and now we're the children who needed help. Maybe someday we can help other families like us." Ben looked at his son with pride and love that felt almost overwhelming. Noah had understood something that Ben was just beginning to grasp. Their discovery of Samuel's treasure was really a discovery of their own purpose and potential. They'd come to the mountains broken and desperate, but they were about to leave as guardians of hope for people around the world they'd never meet. "I think Samuel would be proud of us," Ben said as they settled into their sleeping bags near the fire. "I think he'd be proud of what we're going to do next," Noah replied, and Ben realized his son was absolutely right. 6 months later, Ben Carter stood in the same clearing where he'd first seen the dollar cabin, but everything had changed in ways that still took his breath away. The cabin itself looked much the same. He'd been careful to preserve Samuel Whitmore's original stonework and design, but the surrounding property buzzed with purposeful activity that would have made the original builder proud. The foundation ruins that had once marked Samuel's schoolhouse were now the site of a modern workshop, where technicians assembled water purification systems using updated versions of Samuel's original specifications. The building was larger than Samuel's original structure, but built with the same attention to craftsmanship and the same commitment to serving others. Noah, now 11 and taller by several inches, emerged from the workshop carrying a clipboard and wearing the kind of serious expression that meant he was handling important responsibilities. His role as youth coordinator for the Whitmore Foundation for Water Access was more than ceremonial. His insights into how children experienced the world had proven invaluable for designing systems that worked effectively in schools and communities. "Dad, The delegation from Guatemala is here for their training session, Noah announced, his voice carrying the confidence that had grown steadily over months of meaningful work. And Martha called to say the documentary crew wants to interview us about Samuel's story tomorrow. Ben nodded, still amazed by how quickly their mountain sanctuary had become a center for humanitarian innovation. The legal process of establishing Samuel's patents had been complex but ultimately successful, helped considerably by the evidence they'd found of the corporate conspiracy that had led to his murder. Modern authorities had been eager to right an 87-year-old injustice, especially when the technology involved could address current global water crises. The breakthrough had come when Ben contacted Dr. Sarah Chen, a water systems engineer at Colorado State University, about evaluating Samuel's invention. Dr. Chen had been stunned by the sophistication of Samuel's 1938 design and had helped them navigate the process of updating the technology for modern manufacturing while preserving its essential accessibility and affordability. "This is revolutionary work," Dr. Chen had told them during one of her early visits to the cabin. Samuel Whitmore was decades ahead of his time, and the humanitarian framework he created is exactly what the world needs now. Through Dr. Chen's connections, word of the Whitmore Foundation had spread through networks of humanitarian organizations, development agencies, and grassroots communities that needed reliable access to clean water. The demand had been overwhelming, not just for water purification systems, but for the training and support that ensured communities could maintain and operate the technology independently. Ben walked toward the restored schoolhouse, where a group of community leaders from Central America were learning to assemble and maintain water purification systems that would serve thousands of people in their home villages. The training program had become one of the Foundation's most successful initiatives, creating a network of local experts who could support the technology long-term, rather than creating dependence on outside assistance. Inside the schoolhouse, Ben found Martha Henderson leading a session on community engagement strategies. At 78, she'd proven to be the Foundation's most valuable resource, bringing not just her memories of Samuel's original work, but decades of experience in rural community development. Samuel always said that technology is only as good as the wisdom that guides its use, Martha was telling the trainees. These water purification systems aren't just machines, they're tools for building stronger, healthier communities. The trainees, teachers, health workers, and community organizers from villages that had never had access to reliably clean water listened with the focused attention of people who understood they were learning skills that could save lives. Ben had been moved to tears more than once by letters from communities where Whitmore Foundation systems had eliminated waterborne diseases that had plagued children for generations. After the training session, Ben and Noah walked to their favorite evening spot, the well where they'd found Samuel's compass 6 months earlier. The area had been converted into a memorial garden, with plants and flowers that bloomed throughout the mountain growing season, and a stone marker bearing Samuel's words, "For the children who need sanctuary." "Dad, do you ever miss how simple things were when it was just us and the mystery?" Noah asked, settling on the wooden bench they'd installed beside the well. Ben considered the question while watching the sun set over mountains that had become home to something much larger than he'd ever imagined possible. "Sometimes, but then I think about all the kids who have clean water now because of what we found, and I know we made the right choice." The Whitmore Foundation had deployed water purification systems to 43 communities across 6 countries, with more installations scheduled every month. Each system served an average of 300 people, meaning that over 12,000 individuals now had access to clean water because of Samuel Whitmore's invention and Ben and Noah's decision to honor his vision. But the Foundation's impact extended beyond just technology deployment. The training programs had created a network of skilled technicians in communities around the world. The scholarship fund they'd established using profits from licensing Samuel's technology to larger humanitarian organizations was supporting the education of children who otherwise couldn't afford schooling. Most meaningfully to Ben, the foundation had begun accepting applications from families in crisis who needed temporary sanctuary at the mountain campus while they rebuilt their lives. "I got a letter today from Maria in Honduras," Noah said, pulling an envelope from his pocket. "She says the water system we installed at her school has let them expand their lunch program because they can safely prepare more food." Ben smiled, reading over his son's shoulder as Noah shared the letter. Maria was 8 years old, the same age Noah had been when they'd first arrived at the cabin, and her careful Spanish handwriting described a world where children no longer got sick from contaminated water and could focus on learning instead of surviving. "Samuel would be proud," Ben said, and he meant it completely. As darkness settled over their valley, lights began to appear in windows of the buildings that had grown up around the original cabin. Dormitories for visiting trainees, workshops for advanced manufacturing, offices for coordinating global distribution efforts. The mountain sanctuary that Samuel Whitmore had built for a handful of orphaned children now served hundreds of people working to improve conditions for thousands more around the world. "Dad," Noah said, as they prepared to return to the cabin. "For dinner, I've been thinking about what I want to be when I grow up." "What's that?" "I want to be like Samuel. I want to invent things that help children who need help." Ben looked at his son, at the boy who'd helped him find treasure beyond anything they'd imagined when they'd first arrived at the dollar cabin, who'd grown into a young person with wisdom and compassion that consistently amazed everyone he met, who'd understood from the beginning that their real adventure wasn't about finding something hidden, but about becoming the people they were meant to be. "You know what, Noah? I think you're already like Samuel, and I think the best part of our adventure is just getting started." They walked back to the cabin together, father and son who'd lost everything and found something immeasurably more valuable in return. Behind them, the memorial garden caught the last light of evening, and Samuel Whitmore's words seemed to whisper on the mountain wind. "The greatest treasure is not what you find, but what you choose to do with it." In the morning, they would welcome new trainees, install systems in communities that had waited too long for clean water, and continue building the legacy that had been entrusted to their care. But tonight, they were simply a father and son who'd learned that home isn't just a place you live. It's a place where hope grows stronger and love multiplies when you share it with others who need sanctuary. The dollar cabin had given them exactly what they'd paid for, and immeasurably more than they'd ever dared to dream.